The last thing Kaelo Adisa did before boarding the Conclave shuttle was press his thumb into the spine of a battered book, not to open it, just to feel the grain of it, the way his grandmother had taught him. The book was 3 centuries old and smelled like old rain and iron. He tucked it back inside his coat and stepped forward into the white light of the docking bay. And the door sealed behind him like a verdict. The shuttle rose without ceremony. Below, the station called Remnant Shelf drifted against the dark, a ring of welded salvage and repurposed ore haulers that held, at last count, 11,000 human beings. The last free human settlement in the Tharyn expanse. Kaelo watched it shrink through the viewport until it was just a smear of light. Then he turned away, because watching it made his hands shake. He was 34 years old. He had been appointed the human witness at the Conclave's final hearing, on the grounds that he spoke 11 languages, had served 6 years as an archivist for the Colonial Memory Bureau, and had once talked a Tharyn trade commissioner out of boarding an unarmed medical freighter by reading him, verbatim, 90 minutes of historical record. Had found the experience incomprehensible and slightly alarming, which was, apparently, the closest thing humans had to leverage. He was not a soldier, he was not a politician. He was a man who remembered things, and who believed, sometimes against considerable evidence, that memory was a form of force. The Conclave vessel received him at the outer airlock. 2 Tharyn guards walked him through corridors that smelled of mineral oil and something faintly floral. The way all Tharyn spaces smelled, a biological signal, Kaelo knew, that meant the ship's atmosphere was under administrative authority. It meant he was in a space where rules were being enforced. It meant, in the particular flavor of that scent, that someone of high rank had authorized his transit. He had spent 11 years studying the Tharyn. Their language had 4 registers, each corresponding to a different relationship to time. Things that were permanent, things that were temporary, things that had ended, and things that had not yet been permitted to end. Humanity, in all official Tharyn documentation, was classified under the 4th register, a thing that had not yet been permitted to end. That was what today was about. The chamber they brought him to was large and cold, and perfectly circular. The floor was polished black stone, or something that behaved like stone, and the ceiling curved upward into a geometry that Kaelo could not parse without feeling slightly nauseated. Around the upper circumference of the room, in tiered alcoves that receded into shadow, sat the 7 members of the Tharyn Conclave. He couldn't see their faces. The light was arranged so that the center of the room was fully illuminated and everything above was dark, which he understood was intentional. He was the thing on display. At the far end of the chamber, on a raised platform at ground level, sat a single figure who was lit differently from the rest, a softer, older light, amber rather than white. This was the one they called, in translation, the Keeper of Measure, an elder, a kind of living archive in her own right. Kaelo had read about her but never seen her. She was very still. Hands rested on the arms of her seat like objects placed there carefully. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't read, which was unusual, because he could normally read Tharyn expressions at least well enough to know which direction trouble was coming from. A voice came from the ceiling, translated, flat, precise. "You are Adasa, designated witness for the Human Settlement Remnant Shelf, in the matter of the final hearing on continued existence." "I am," Kaelo said. "You understand the terms of this proceeding." "I do." The terms were these. The Tharyn Conclave had, 412 years ago, authorized the removal of humanity from its home system on the grounds that human expansion patterns were incompatible with Conclave stability. That removal had been, there was a word in Tharyn for it that translated roughly as, a controlled conclusion, which was, Kaelo thought every time he encountered it in the records, possibly the most chilling phrase he had ever read in any language. Humanity had been scattered, expelled, driven out of its own solar system aboard whatever ships could be launched in time, into whatever dark corners of the expanse the Conclave had not yet fully administered. 4 centuries of exile, 4 centuries of surviving in the margins of a civilization that classified them as a problem that had not yet been solved. Now the Conclave had decided to solve it. Remnant Shelf was the last. Every other human settlement had been absorbed, dispersed, or simply ended. The conclave had been patient. Tharyn operated on timescales that made human history look like a single afternoon. Even patience has an administrative conclusion, and this was it. The hearing would proceed over 3 days. Kalo had been given access to the conclave's own records, a gesture of procedural fairness that he suspected was also a test. He had spent 4 months reading them. He had not slept much. He had made notes in the margins of a notebook he'd carried since graduate school and filled completely, and then started on the old book, the one that smelled like rain, writing tiny between the printed lines of verse, in a hand so small he sometimes needed a lens to read it back. First day of the hearing was exposition. The conclave read its records aloud, through the translated voice in the ceiling. Kalo listened and did not interrupt. Errors were accurate, in the way that a wound is accurate. They contained exactly what had happened, with no consideration of what it had meant. Populations relocated, infrastructure decommissioned, systems reassigned. A 400-year chronicle of the dismantling of a civilization, rendered in the language of logistics. He kept his hands folded on the table in front of him. He kept his face still. He thought about his grandmother's apartment on Remnant Shelf. The smell of it, the low sound of music she played from a device so old its power cell had to be replaced every 6 months with a part she had someone machine by hand. He thought about the morning he was 8 years old, and she sat him down with the book and read to him from it in a voice that was both fierce and very quiet, and told him, "This is what we carried. This is what they could not take." On the evening of the first day, alone in the quarters they had assigned him, he opened the book and read for an hour. It fell open naturally to certain pages worn smooth with use. He read the poems of the people who had written from the margins, the ones who had understood. In whatever century they lived, that language was the one technology no empire could fully confiscate. He thought about what he was going to say. He thought about whether it would matter. He thought about the keeper of measure, and the expression on her face that he couldn't read, and decided it was worth paying attention to. The second day was argument. The conclave's designated advocate laid out the case for final resolution, the administrative term, with the methodical clarity of someone who had made this case before and never lost. The argument was not cruel. It was not even particularly hostile. It was, Kalo thought, the most dangerous kind of argument. One made without malice, by people who genuinely believed they were being reasonable. The humans of Remnant Shelf, the advocate explained, represented a continued resource burden on surrounding systems. Their expansion patterns, even in their diminished state, produced instability indices outside acceptable conclave parameters. Their cultural practices were non-integrating. They had, over 4 centuries, failed to demonstrate capacity for assimilation. The conclave had been patient. The conclave had provided multiple opportunities. The conclave had, in its records, 17 separate instances of offering humanity a path to resolution that did not involve the current proceeding. All 17 had been declined. Kalo could have contested several of these points on factual grounds. Instead, he wrote in the margin of his notebook, "They think patience is the same as generosity, and then, they have never had to be patient about their own survival." On the evening of the second day, the keeper of measure sent a message to his quarters. It came through the translation system, and it said, "I would speak with you before the 3rd morning. If you are willing." He was willing. She received him in a room much smaller than the hearing chamber, a working space, with actual objects in it, which surprised him. Tharyn official spaces were usually emptied of anything personal. This room had instruments he didn't recognize, and what appeared to be a collection of physical recordings, discs, cylinders, formats he couldn't identify, arranged along one wall with a care that suggested they mattered to her. She gestured for him to sit. The amber light was in here too. Up close, she was older than he'd realized. Her features arranged in the particular stillness of someone who has long since stopped performing composure and simply possessed it. She said in Tharyn, "You have prepared something for tomorrow." "I have," he said in the same language. "I have read your record," she said. "You are an archivist. I am. Our records indicate that the Colonial Memory Bureau has been compiling human history since the 3rd generation of the exile. Is this accurate?" "The Bureau was founded in the 2nd generation," he said. by a woman named Desiree Fontaine. She was a cargo handler on a transport vessel. She started keeping records because she believed that if enough people forgot where they came from, they would lose the ability to understand where they were going. The keeper of measure was quiet for a moment. "What is it," she said, "that you intend to present tomorrow?" Kalo thought about how to answer. "Conclave has presented its record," he said. "What happened? What was decided? What was done?" "I intend to present a record of a different kind." He paused. "I am going to give you the 400 years. She looked at him. "We have the 400 years. In full. You have the data," he said. "I'm going to give you the experience of it." She was quiet again. He had the sense, sitting in that room with its amber light and its wall of recordings, that she was not unacquainted with that distinction. "Is a word," he said. "In the oldest recorded version of the language my grandmother spoke. The language itself no longer has native speakers. It hasn't since before the exile. The word is Sankofa. It means, approximately, it is not wrong to go back and fetch what you left behind." He reached into his coat and set the book on the table between them. "Everything I am going to say tomorrow comes from this." She looked at the book for a long time. He let her look. "The conclave will not be moved by sentiment," she said finally. It was not quite a warning. It was something more careful than that. "I know," Kalo said. "I'm not going to appeal to sentiment." When he left her quarters and walked back through the mineral and flower smell of the corridors, he did not feel confident exactly, but he felt something that was adjacent to it. He felt like a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally arrived at the place where he was always supposed to set it down. The third morning, he walked into the hearing chamber and took his place at the center of the lit floor and waited while the conclave settled into their shadowed alcoves. The keeper of measure took her seat on the platform. The translated voice announced the third session. "The human witness will now present," it said. Kalo set the book on the table in front of him but did not open it. He didn't need to. He had been carrying the contents of it for 20 years. "I want to start," he said, "with a number." He let the silence hold for a moment. In the Tharyn ceremonial register, silence after a declarative statement was an invitation to attend carefully. He had chosen his register deliberately. "The number is 412, he said. "That is the number of years since the conclave authorized what your records call a controlled conclusion to human presence in our home system. I would like to ask the conclave to hold that number in mind, not as a data point, as a duration, as something that was lived." He paused. "In the first generation of the exile, a man named Elias Drummond kept a log aboard a transport hauler called the Volta. The Volta was carrying 600 people, mostly families, in conditions that exceeded safe capacity by a factor of 3. The log entries for the first 8 months describe equipment failures, rationing decisions, 2 deaths from preventable illness. On the 241st day, Drummond wrote, "We sang tonight. I don't know who started it. Someone in the cargo hold. By the end everyone was. I don't know the name of the song. It doesn't matter. What matters is that we still knew how." Kalo heard nothing from the alcoves above him. The Tharyn were very good at silence. He had learned to read the quality of it. This silence had a texture he hadn't expected. He continued. "In the second generation, the settlement called New Threshold lost 40% of its population to a cooling system failure during a hard winter. The survivors organized around a woman named Coretta Vance, who was a schoolteacher. She established a rotating watch system, a rationing protocol, and a daily assembly at which someone was required to speak. Not about logistics, but about where they came from, about what they remembered," she said, in a recorded statement that the Bureau has preserved. "We are not going to forget our way out of this. We are going to remember our way through it." He opened the book now, not to read from it, just to place his hand flat on a page, the way his grandmother had. In the third generation, a poet named Asha Williams, born on a transport vessel and raised on Remnant Shelf, wrote a cycle of 48 poems that she performed at street corners, in market halls, in whatever space would hold a crowd. She performed them in 3 languages simultaneously, switching mid-line, because she said the grief of the exile didn't fit in one tongue. Those poems are still performed on Remnant Shelf. Children learn them before they learn mathematics. I learned them when I was 5 years old. In my grandmother's kitchen, while she made the particular tea she made every morning, from plants she grew in a small clay pot on her windowsill. Plants that were descended from a cutting her grandmother had kept since the Volta. Something moved in the alcoves. He didn't look up to see what. In the fourth generation, he stopped, took a breath. In the fourth generation, the conclave offered what your records describe as Reintegration Protocol 7, absorption of human population into Tharyn administrative structures, full civic standing contingent on a period of cultural remediation estimated at 3 generations. Humanity declined. He closed the book. They declined because Desiree Fontaine's granddaughter, who was by then the director of the Colonial Memory Bureau, stood up in a public assembly and read the definition of the word remediation. Then she read the definition of the word erasure. Then she sat down, and the vote was unanimous. The silence in the chamber now was different. He had been watching the keeper of measure throughout, and she was watching him with the expression he still couldn't quite name, but was beginning to understand. It was the expression of someone recognizing something they had not expected to find here. I am not going to tell you, Kalo said, that humanity is without fault. I have spent 11 years studying your records, and I know exactly what the instability indices show. I know what the expansion data looks like. I know that from a certain vantage point, the conclave's concern is not without basis. He paused. I am going to tell you something else. I am going to tell you what the conclave's records do not contain. He reached into his coat and removed a small drive, civilian format. Nothing that could be mistaken for anything threatening. He set it on the table. This contains 412 years of the Colonial Memory Bureau's complete archive. Every log, every testimony, every poem, song, painting, argument, joke, blueprint, recipe, and prayer that was recorded and preserved during the exile. 412 years of human beings deciding, every single day, not to stop. He left his hand on the drive. I am not asking the conclave to be moved by it. I am asking the conclave to look at it, because your records describe what you did to us. This is what we did with it. He lifted his hand from the drive and straightened. There is a figure in our oldest tradition, he said. Not a god exactly, something more like a function, a key keeper of time. The stories describe this figure as one who walks through the years without aging, watching everything that passes, carrying a specific responsibility, not to prevent suffering, but to witness it, to hold it in memory, to ensure that what happened cannot be made to have not happened. He looked up toward the alcoves, toward the shadows. I have been called in some of the less formal communications about this hearing, the human witness. I have been thinking, during the 3 months I spent preparing for today, about what that means. He picked up the book and held it in both hands. It means that I carry this. That the people of Remnant Shelf carry this. That the 11,000 people on that station out there carry this. Not as a wound, not only as a wound, but as a record, as proof, as the specific evidence that we were here, that we endured, that we built something worth protecting in every generation since the exile began, and that we are still building it. His voice was level. He had practiced keeping it level. The conclave has the authority to render final resolution. I am not disputing that authority. Standing here, in this chamber, in this light to tell you that if you do, you will be ending something that has survived 400 years of every condition you could put in front of it. And I want you to know what you are ending, not as a data point, as a fact, as a thing that was alive and chose to remain alive, over and over for 4 centuries, because it understood something that I think this archive will show you. He set the drive carefully back on the table. He set the book beside it. We are not a problem that has not yet been solved, he said. We are a people that has not yet been finished. There is a difference, and I think the keeper of measure knows it. He sat down. The chamber was very quiet. The mineral and flower smell of it seemed, for a moment, slightly different than it had been. Something warmer underneath it. Something he couldn't identify. The Tharyn do not deliberate in public. The alcoves emptied without announcement. The keeper of measure left last. As she passed the edge of the lit ace, she paused and looked back at Kalo and said one word in a register he had never heard used in an official space. It was the temporary register, the register for things that were changing. He didn't sleep that night. He sat with the book open on the small table in his quarters and read things he had read 100 times. And they sounded different in this space. In this particular dark, he read Asha Williams, whose lines moved in 3 languages like a river over stones. He read Drummond's log, the entry about the singing. He read a letter that had no addressee, found in a sealed compartment aboard an exile-era ship, written in a hand that had been identified as a child's that said only, "We are still going. I want whoever finds this to know that. We are still going, and we are going together, and I think we are going to be okay." He folded his hands on top of the book. Outside, beyond the hull of the Conclave vessel, Remnant Shelf was still out there, drifting in its slow orbit, its lights on, its 11,000 people going about the business of being alive. Trot thought about his grandmother's kitchen. He thought about the tea, and the clay pot, and the cutting that had traveled from the Volta across 4 generations to sit on a windowsill in a salvaged corridor. He thought about the fact that she had kept it alive not because it was useful, but because it had come from somewhere. And she believed that things that came from somewhere were worth tending. He thought about the keeper of measure, and the word she had used as she left. In the Tharyn language, the temporary register did not mean ending, end. It meant in the process of becoming something else. The decision came on the 4th morning, delivered through the translation system in the flat, precise voice that rendered everything equivalent. Conclave had reviewed the submitted archive. The Conclave had considered the testimony of the human witness. The Conclave was, and here the translated voice paused in a way that translated voices did not usually pause, as though the system itself was encountering a construction it was not accustomed to rendering, revising its classification. Humanity, effective from the date of this hearing, would be reclassified from the 4th register to the 2nd, a thing that had not yet been permitted to end, to a thing that was ongoing. There were 17 conditions. Kaelo read them carefully and found that he could work with all of them. He thought Desiree Fontaine would have found them workable. He thought Coretta Vance would have had opinions about conditions 9 and 14. And he made a note to address those in the follow-on negotiations, and to make sure that the people at those negotiations had read Asha Williams. He went to the viewport and watched Remnant Shelf. The station was small against the dark, its lights steady. 11,000 people who did not yet know, who were going about their morning, whatever morning meant on a salvaged ring of metal in the Tharyn expanse, which was the same thing it had always meant, which was another day, tended carefully, because they had understood since the first generation that days were the raw material of survival, and you did not waste them. He pressed his thumb into the spine of the book. The grain of it, the weight of it. He thought about the word Sankofa. It is not wrong to go back and fetch what you left behind. His grandmother had explained it to him when he was 8 years old, in the kitchen that smelled like that particular tea. And he had asked her what it meant to fetch something, if you couldn't go back to where you left it. She had looked at him with the expression of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this question and said, "You carry it forward. That's the fetching. You make sure it comes with you. Then wherever you go, it isn't left behind." He had been carrying it for 26 years. He had carried it into a room where the light was arranged to make him feel small, and he had set it on a table in the dark, and it had been enough. Not because it was impressive or overwhelming or strategically irresistible, because it was true. Because 400 years of people who refused to forget themselves had made it true. Generation by generation, in cargo holds and schoolrooms and street corners and kitchen windows, in 3 languages simultaneously. In logs kept by cargo handlers, who believed that records mattered. In letters written by children who wanted someone to know they were still going. The shuttle back to Remnant Shelf was the same shuttle that had brought him. The docking bay received him with the smell of recycled air and machine oil, and the particular human smell of a place where people lived because it was all they had, and they had made it enough. A small crowd had gathered. He knew most of them. He saw his colleague Petra near the back, arms crossed, trying to read his face before he had to say anything. He saw the old archivist Henrique, who had trained him, who had once told him that the most dangerous thing an empire can do to a people is convince them their history isn't worth keeping. He held up the book. The crowd was quiet for a moment. Then Petra uncrossed her arms, and Henrique laughed. A short, sharp, disbelieving laugh that was also entirely believing. And the sound of it moved through the gathered people like a current, like that song on the Volta whose name didn't matter, spreading from the cargo hold outward until everyone knew it, until everyone was in it, until the dark outside the hull was the same dark it had always been. But the light inside was different, was theirs, was ongoing. Kaelo stood at the center of it and let the sound come. He did not speak. There would be time for speaking. There would be 4 centuries worth of follow-on work, negotiations, Condition 9 and Condition 14. The long, slow labor of converting a revised classification into an actual life. Be mornings and rationing decisions, and clay pots on windowsills and children learning poems before mathematics. There would be all of that, all of it still ahead. For now he stood in the docking bay of Remnant Shelf, with the book in his hands, and listened to his people make a sound language did not have a register for. The sound of a thing that was not supposed to still exist, discovering that it did.